Here is the Crescendo Music Education Podcast, episode number 52. This podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Turrbal people. I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. They were the first music makers on this land. Hello, I'm Debbie O'Shea. In this episode, I get to talk with Bryson Tarbet, also known as That Music Teacher. I get to talk to him about all of those things I usually do, gratitude and his journey. So interesting to listen to. But he's also got some great insights that will help us while we are trying to provide a more inclusive classroom. So please enjoy this episode with Bryson Tarbet. And I'd like to welcome to this episode of the Crescendo Music Education, Mr. Bryson Tarbet, who is That Music Teacher. Hello, Bryson.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to see what we can get into.
Oh, it will be so good. I've heard you. I've found you relatively recently, so I had a bit of a listen to your podcasts, but this is the first time we've actually spoken in person. It is in person. Zoom's almost in person.
I'd say so.
Yes. So I want to start, for those people who don't know Bryson, I'm going to read out your bio so that people can be familiar with where you're coming from, as apart from
Sounds good.
The other side of the world, obviously. So Bryson Tarbet is a pre-K to 6th grade general music teacher just outside of Columbus, Ohio. He received his Bachelor's of Music in Music Education from Ohio Wesleyan University, his Master of Music in Music Education with a Code-I emphasis from Capital University. Bryson spent his first year out of college as part of an elementary school intervention team. Oh, have to tell me what an intervention team is. We'll do that in a minute. And he fell in love with working with students with disabilities. Due to this experience, as well as his personal experience as a neurodiverse individual, Bryson feels very strongly about advocating for sensory and emotionally inclusive classrooms. Tell you what, we could all learn a bit more about that, Bryson, so we'll get into that for sure. Bryson started That Music Teacher, LLC. What's LLC?
It's a legal thing.
Oh, okay, good. With the goal of sharing different perspectives on issues pertaining to the lives of music educators across the country and across the world. He also hosts That Music Teacher podcast, a podcast for elementary music teachers, and is the educator behind the Elementary Music Summit. More information about Bryson and That Music Teacher can be found at thatmusicteacher.com. Bryson can also be found on Instagram and Facebook at That Music Teacher. What would be your favourite, Bryson? Are you more on Insta or Facebook?
Instagram tends to be where I hang out more.
Okay. So, but you'll find people if they reach out to you on either of those platforms. Fabulous. Because I think I first reached out to you on Facebook, which is my preferred platform. Okay. Now, listening to that brief bio, do you want to add anything to your summary of work?
I mean, the whole taking your entire career so far and putting into a few paragraphs is always tricky, especially these last few years. Things have been up in the air and things have been changing so quickly. But I would just one thing I want to highlight is that intervention team I worked on. I was supporting so many different students with disabilities, maybe one-on-one. It might have been in a classroom setting. And it really opened my eyes just how the educational system can get compartmentalized sometimes, and how it's so important for us to get out of the music classroom sometimes to see how other things are moving so that we can make sure that our classrooms truly are set up so that anyone can be successful.
Yes, that would have given you really unique perspectives.
It completely changed my trajectory of my career, honestly. Like my hiring principal straight up told me that, she hired me because of that role, because of that experience I had. My entire graduate research line came out of that. And the way that I teach came out of that. So it'd be very unrecognizable.
Wow. So do you still sometimes get out of your classroom to have a look, or do you think that your sort of continuing studies and the connections you've made keep you connected enough with what's happening outside the music classroom?
So I definitely I like to know what's going on just as a person. I have a unique situation in my teaching position where I actually teach at two schools that are on different schedules. So I actually start my day an hour before the school that I end at ends their day. So I have an hour that the kids are still there, but my contract time is done. So a lot of times I'll just like go out and I'll just kind of like see what's going on, or like if anyone's in the hallways, kind of talk to them for a little bit. And that's what I think has been really helpful when it comes to like building relationships, but also building relationships with my colleagues, because we are all very busy, and sometimes it can be very easy for us all to get stuck in our classrooms focusing on the things that we have to get done, that we don't get that collaborative experience that is so incredibly important.
That does sound special. It would be great to have that time. I love that. All right. Now, what would you say, what would you consider to be the highlight or highlights of your journey as a musician and a music educator?
Ooh, those are some good questions. If I really had to think of it, the biggest highlight so far, at least I'll say, of my career is being able to sing again in my classroom. With the COVID restrictions we had here in the States were, let's just leave it at that. And it was rough. There was about a year and a half where the music making really wasn't allowed to sing. Even with masks, singing wasn't. We weren't able to do that, and it was hard, and it was really interesting to see how it changed the way that I taught. Because again, as a vocal major in undergrad, as someone who follows a lot of Kodai, we did a lot of singing, and all of a sudden, all that's gone. And it took a lot of mental toll on myself, um, just trying to do all these different things. But when we were able to get them back singing and noticing that the kids were still singing, and honestly flipping it and realizing that there were some kids that were super, super musical, but that weren't super fun singers. And I was really able to open my eyes to different forms of musicality that were already happening in my classrooms. That experience of teaching through COVID really opened my eyes. That's probably the biggest highlight of my career so far.
Yes, it was fairly major. We didn't feel the restrictions here anywhere near as much as most of the rest of the world. I am quite grateful for that. But yes, our choirs certainly suffered, and
Yeah.
singing in the classroom. And it is joyous to be able to sing full voice again. But interesting that you found those other pathways, which sort of suits what you've communicated about the way you like to teach, catering for the individuals.
For sure. It really kind of opened my eyes to students that even if they're not really into making music, the way they think about music was really cool. And I've implemented a lot of that into my lessons to today, because those kids are in my class. So I should do my best to serve them in wherever they're at in that moment.
Well, I can't wait to find out some of the things that you do. All right. I do like to ask all of my guests about gratitude. I think it's a vital part of having um, a productive, positive mindset, in my opinion. So, for what are you grateful? Personal and professional, or
So
and
many
or.
things. So many things. If I had to really think about the pivot in my life that happened, in my first year of undergrad, I was still on the path of being the next great high school choir director. And as part of that my class my first year, we observed a high school choir director. And all of a sudden I had this moment in the classroom where I realized, this isn't it for me. This is not what I want. And I was heartbroken because I had literally just gotten there, and already my dream has changed. Thankfully, the next week, I was able to observe an amazing elementary music teacher named Megan McDonald, and she completely changed my life, because then I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I need to do. And she really opened my eyes to how music can be so joyful, so play-based, so integral to child development that it's hard to figure out where child development starts and music development, and it's really just changed my entire life. So I am so grateful that I was able to observe her second grade class here in Columbus, Ohio.
It is so powerful, isn't it, to see other music teachers work? I think we don't, well, I know we don't do that enough. Our tertiary systems, actually, we won't talk about tertiary systems here. We're not even training primary music teachers now, but that's part of a bigger story. But our systems, even when they were working properly, did not spend enough time observing. You really need to just go and watch other teachers work, because once you're out there in the big wide world, you're in your music room, working your little backside off, hardly having any time to even get to the toilet or eat, let alone observe other music teachers who aren't in your school. It's so important to be able to see other teachers.
Well, and that's the thing is we have these pre-service teachers observing lots of teachers for good reason, but then we put them in the classroom and we finally have all this context, and then we don't do any more of that. Like, that is one change that I'm super thankful for my administration is if there's a PD that doesn't apply to me, I'm able to basically submit and say, hey, I'm going to go observe this other teacher. And being able to observe as someone who's been teaching is so much more useful because you get to see the context and see how the things are fitting together, rather than everything just you're putting it in your sponge during pre-service teacher training. And you're like, all right, I'm going to hold on to this and eventually I'm going to use it.
And then by the time you get to use it, most of it you've forgotten.
Exactly.
You're in a completely different context, too much. But I think you make a really good point. I think it's up to us as practicing music educators to make these opportunities for ourselves, because we're part of a system where I think of ourselves as a bit of a square peg in a round hole, So yeah, they might be doing the whole school maths PD at this time, and you go, how about while you do that, I organize this? And most administrators will allow you to be quite creative with the way you do that if they know you're doing it for the right purpose.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think it's up to us to organize those opportunities. Yeah. So did we finish with gratitude? Yes.
I mean, if I kept going, we'd be here all day. There are just so many things that I'm gracious for.
Yes. And I think that one was obviously a very important one, that part of your career. Now, there's so many things that we've touched on. And when we first talked about what we could talk about in this podcast, I really felt that we should choose something about which you're most passionate, which does sound to me like this neurodiversity. So neurodivergence and inclusion of students with disabilities. And then you go on to say creating sensory-friendly classroom environments. So you also said in your bio that you are neurodiverse. Is it okay to ask you about where you come from personally? And then let's get into some of the things that you do for your students.
For sure. So I myself was diagnosed with ADHD from a young age, and within the past few years have been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, which are things that I would assume, I would kind of guess that you see a lot of already, even if it's not an official diagnosis or anything, is that there are kids like me in your classroom. And it really, part of it comes from my own experience going through school. Part of it goes through the experience that I had on the intervention team. But I noticed a lot of students were getting served in our classrooms, but a lot of students were just there. And yes, it's awesome that they're in your classroom, but how do we really integrate them into the curriculum? How do we really truly make our curriculum work in a way that works for their brains? How do we set up classroom environments so they're set up for success? And that threw me down this whole rabbit hole of universal design and inclusion and differentiation. And the more I researched it and the more I went into it, I realized that music teachers, especially elementary music teachers, we don't have that. We don't have that background information. We really have to go looking for it. If you received that training in undergrad, it was probably either in general education setting, or maybe it was just touched on here or there. And the reality is we are juggling so many things that sometimes things get omitted. And unfortunately, a lot of times that happens to be when it comes to differentiation and allowing students who are neurodiverse, allowing students with disabilities to be able to access our curriculum, whether or not the intent was to to not allow those students to access their curriculum in the same way, the outcome is the same. So that's given me one of these soapboxes where I really want to I want to share what I know as a student, but as well as an educator, to make sure that anyone that walks into my classroom is able to access the curriculum by design.
It's I know that in the back of my mind and the back of possibly the mind of many of the listeners, that sounds great. Oh boy, we so 100% agree with you. But we've got 800 children, for example. Some have 1,000. I'm lucky I've only got 600 a week. It just sounds like a big ask.
The reality is it is a big ask, but but on the flip side, it's worth it, and we are ethically bound to serve our students. Now, am I saying that there aren't systematic things that get in the way of us doing that? Absolutely not. The way that I view setting students up for success comes into the design, which really comes down to making sure that your physical space is set up in a way that your students will be successful. Your lesson framework itself is going to allow those students to be successful, and that the understanding of the student needs, you have that requisite information, so that when you're putting these different things in the design phase of your lesson, you understand what needs are represented in your classroom. But it's definitely not an easy task by any means.
All right. So if we want to do better for all of our students, because I imagine if you're setting something up, you're also better catering for every child, because they all have different learning styles and different not only ways of learning, but the time it takes them to process something. So I would imagine what you're doing is actually best for every child, not just the neurodiverse child.
Yeah, there are definitely things that are more, strategies that are more focused on neurodiverse children. But the reality is the foundations of good teaching and the foundations of differentiation allow everyone to be successful. Sometimes we get really worried because, well, if I'm focusing so much on this population, what about this population? And the reality is when we focus on removing barriers to the curriculum, that can help all students, regardless of what population they may or may not identify with.
Yes, I love that. So how would you suggest, it's all right, I'm just writing down here, remove barriers. It's a good way of thinking about it. So how would you advise someone who wants to do better in this space? How would you advise them to start?
Well, first of all, just start. Don't wait until you have all the answers. Take baby steps along the way. But if I want to give some actual practical stuff, which I totally understand, I would focus on your physical classroom layout and how it is structured, things like that. For instance, in my classroom, I have these really, really bright fluorescent lights. I also have wonderful, essentially wall of windows, which most of the day there's a lot of sun coming in. So I never have all of my lights on because for me, that's just too bright. It's too much sensory input. And I know for a lot of my students, it's the same. So that's one way that I was able to make my classroom a little bit more accessible. A lot of students have sensory needs when it comes to sound. In a music classroom, obviously there's a lot of sound going on. I myself, when I teach, I have special earplugs that I use to kind of make things so I can still hear them, but I don't get overstimulated. And in my classroom, I have a bunch of the over-the-ear headphones that students are able to grab at any point if they need them. And what I love about the way that I use these headphones is I don't say, oh, Johnny, you're plugging your ears, here's some headphones. Any student is able to go grab them for any reason. And, for instance, if I have 30 kids playing a glockenspiel at the same time, there's going to be a lot of sound. So there might be students that typically would be fine, but in that setting, they're like, this is too much. Or maybe they have a headache that day, or maybe they just got hearing aids and they're still adjusting to them, whatever. Anyone can go grab those. And what I love about that is because eventually the novelty wears off, and the students that aren't benefiting from that intervention or that strategy, they're not going to use it anymore. But any student that was able to find value from it, regardless of if I know they have a diagnosis or anything like that, they're still able to get what they need. And that's where it comes down to really making it so it's not othering. It's really allowing it, like you said before, allowing any student to access that strategy.
Yes, I love that concept. And also the fact that you mentioned after the novelty wears off, because you know that you're going to have to ride out this is exciting and new. That's human nature. I want to have a go at that. So you do have to let that little bit of time go where they're going to experiment because they want to have a go, and then it will settle down. So I guess some teachers might be put off by the fact that, well, I know that there are going to be children that will abuse them. You know what I mean by abuse.
Yeah.
Use them when they don't need to. But you just need to go through that, don't you? It's a bit like, I remember when I was speaking to Tanya Lejeune, and it's a term I really like, noodling. I'm going to borrow that from Tanya. And she said when children first get an instrument, she lets them have a little noodle and they just get to play. Then you go, okay, rest position, and then they know they can't touch it. But you need to let the children have that little bit of venting their natural curiosity, don't you?
Exactly. I think sometimes we get so stuck in making the kids follow our rules that we don't stop and think why those rules are set up in that way. So in that example, why do the students need to go over to their instrument and not play any notes until we start? Why can't they play 5 notes and then be done? Like, they're able to get into that. They're able to go, oh, okay, now cool. I got out that what I wanted. Otherwise, they're not listening to your instructions either. It really comes down to, again, just being aware of where the kids are, what a child's brain is doing, because again, it's different than our brains. We can't make decisions based on our brains for our students because that's not how that works. And I feel like a lot of teachers, or a lot of times when we have these classroom management clashes, oftentimes you can trace it back to an expectation or a rule or something that just isn't set up properly. Maybe it's completely wrong. Maybe it wasn't introduced correctly. Maybe it wasn't framed the right way so that the student fully understood why that was the expectation or something like that. While students' brains are very different than our brains, they are still people. So if someone kept telling you all day, every day, don't do this, and they never got to get any context why, or they never got to get any input, or they never got to make any choices, well, yeah, eventually you're going to start pushing back. And that's where I feel like we can, when we make sure students are in our classroom and truly they're in our classroom doing all the wonderful music making, that is where we're able to get so many of the classroom management issues out of the way, because the students want to be there. They're able to access the curriculum, and that is where the magic can happen.
So how do you go about, you're mentioning about choice, giving children choice. Is that fairly important when you're looking about creating inclusive classrooms?
I think it really, especially when you're thinking about like differentiating the actual instruction or assessment. One of my favorite examples of differentiation comes to, we had my students, they had their glockenspiels, and I wanted them to come up with a song that had 8 notes. That was my thing. I wanted them to compose on the staff and play it on the glockenspiel. And there were some students that fully understood and got the concept of the pentatonic scale. But there were some students that were still not quite there. They really didn't have that. Really didn't have the ability to successfully use the pentatonic scale on a staff and then play it. Mm-hmm. So any student was able to choose between creating a pentatonic composition or creating a composition using only mi, re, do. Both students were creating on the staff. both students were be able to play their instruments back or play their compositions back on their instruments. And then I actually differentiated one level higher is students were able to show the notation on the staff however they wanted. So a lot of students chose taking a little whiteboard marker and actually just drawing a note head on the line. But some students chose to use an eraser and or like a little gem, a little manipulative to put it there. And for one student in particular, his fine motor skills, if he had to figure out how to use the marker and make the line, not between the lines, but on the line, he wouldn't have been successful in that. But because I took away those soft skills and allowed them to choose when it came down to how they do it, I still got to them to do the musical goal. But the way they got there, they were able to choose the way that was most successful for them.
Yes, and I'm a bit passionate about my manipulatives because not only are they fun, but like you said, that they are so powerful for the
Yeah, for sure.
kids that have dysgraphia or, they'd much rather. One of my assessment tasks with year 2 is to create a rhythmic composition with paddle pop sticks. Love my paddle pop sticks. It's fun. They're all spread out on the floor. It's just so much better than a bit of paper and they're drawing their Tarzan TTs, and you can still
Exactly.
see who understands the concepts. So yes, I see what you're saying. So you're building in levels within the one task. They can just show you their knowledge in different ways. And so that comes in when you're talking about designing lesson. Do you call it lesson design?
So I guess that concept works. The term itself is universal design for learning. That is an educational structure that I did through my graduate research. And what it comes down to is the amount of time that you spend in the actual crafting of the design of the lesson rather than the implementation. That's the important part, is making sure that your lesson is set up so that when you're in the moment, you're able to really rock it.
Okay, so that's something we should, because I have not looked into universal design. That's something, maybe should we pop a link in the show notes if people want to find out more about that?
Yeah, I can send something over for you.
Yeah, that would, well, it just sounds like something very
It's
interesting
and
to.
that really the entirety of UDL, or universal design for learning, comes down to removing barriers, to
Right.
ensuring that our students can access that curriculum. And it's not necessary, it's more of this is how you should think about things, this is how you should, like a framework to view the world, rather than do this to this to this and this, which I like because I like the freedom of being able to do what I feel is right as the expert in the room for my students. It's not this structured thing. It's more of a way of looking at the way that your classroom is set up and your lessons are set up. And again, identifying those points where we have a barrier to access.
That sounds really interesting. And as a Kodai-based teacher, I like my sequences and my structures. And partly this sounds a little bit scary to me because it almost sounds like you've got to let go a little bit.
Yeah, there's
Am I
definitely
wrong? Am I wrong?
control.
You can
There's
tell
definitely
me.
a control release sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the entire lesson. Every student gets to choose everything. It could be, I want my students to create Ta and TT rhythms. All right, you can use popsicle sticks or you can use a whiteboard. Okay, cool. They still got the choice. They got to pick whichever one they wanted, but you still got the musical goal. So it's understanding that, taking those little steps rather than trying to apply everything all at once. That's where the real success is going to come in.
Yeah, no, that sounds fabulous. Thank you for that. So, is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your classroom and sensory friendly classrooms before we go on to our nuggets of fabulous?
I would say the biggest thing is get the kids moving. My classroom is a big open room with the only furniture in the room is my desk and my chair. And we get them up and moving because, one, I feel like kids sit down too much. And music does not, very rarely do you sit and listen to music. Music is moving, music is dancing, music is getting up and move. And I don't, it's just, there's so much more joy when the students are able to act like kids in your classroom, and they're able to move, and they're able to be set up for success because they're not being asked to sit down for 40 minutes. In my classroom, I have a kind of an unwritten rule in the back of my head. When I'm designing my lessons, I don't want to be in one space for more than 7 minutes. So if we are sitting on the floor and I'm reading a book, all right, I have 7 minutes. I got to get going because otherwise that's when you're going to get the kids that need to move. They're going to start doing a little swirl dance. And then we have classroom management issues. Then we spend, we're spending time trying to get Johnny to sit down instead of listen, when the reality is your lesson wasn't set up in a way that Johnny could be successful. Why are we spending 20 minutes sitting crisscross applesauce when we're in kindergarten? That's not going to work. So it really comes down to let them move, let them move, let them move.
I love that. And I'm assuming it's similar in the USA to Australia. The swing over the last few years, it's been a few years, to sitting in their desks to learn and to do, standardized tests, and, play-based learning has been virtually pushed out.
Yeah, for sure.
Our prep levels, which used to be preschool here, used to be play in the sandpit, do the gross motor things, play with the balls, paint. Now it's fairly early on. Let's do our
Yeah,
sight words, and and you go, let them be children, for goodness sake. So I think it makes the music room so important.
for sure. And it also, when uh, another soapbox, but like when we focus so much on testing, students get to, whether or not we say it, they start understanding that their value is related to their test scores.
Mm.
And when we have students that are struggling to learn, maybe they can't read, or maybe they're really struggling with math, they're able to be successful in our room in a different way. They're able to access a completely different set of skills. They're able to be successful because it's different. Than not only is it different content, but the way that we interact with it. Rarely is there a right or wrong answer. And that's why I love it, because I really can allow kids to be successful regardless of what happened before they came into my room.
Yes, I love that. And it does. It gives you joy, doesn't it? To know they
For
can
sure.
be successful with you. Have fun in your room, be successful, learn, and not be labeled as the dumb one. I've had children say to me, oh, no, I can't do that. I'm dumb.
And that breaks your heart. It breaks
It
your
does.
heart.
It does.
I've had students who really struggled, by fourth grade, they're still struggling to read. They're still struggling with math. And then because when they get older and they start still struggling with school, that's when the behavior issues really come out, because they don't want to feel stupid, but they do. And because of the way that our schools are set up.
Mhm.
So what I love, especially about teaching recorder, is it's new for everyone. No one knows how to do this. Very rarely does anyone come in and say, I took recorder lessons,
Yeah.
and everyone is on the same level playing field. And I've seen these kids light up because I was able to get, or I not, let me say, not me, music was able to give them a chance to be successful in the day when they are working so hard just to get by in the rest of the classroom. But in music, they can let that wall down. They can be on the same level of everyone else. And it really, truly is magical to see just how that can change a student's perspective in your classroom.
Yes, absolutely. And I also think that singing games, even just playing the game, we're all in the circle, including me. I can be out. That they feel valued and worthy.
For sure. There's a lot of community that music has been involved in. And
Mhm.
I think the elementary music room is a wonderful way to show how music and community can be related.
Yes, and I believe that just that in itself is part of an inclusive classroom.
For sure.
Yeah.
I could not agree more.
So I think that we're all starting from a place where we're a little bit ahead in some ways of the classroom environment when it comes to inclusivity. That's being positive about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways that, for one, a lot of us have a lot of freedom about what and how we teach.
Yes.
And that alone can be super helpful. Now, the other side of it is that we have to figure it all out a lot of times. But I think that alone, that freedom to teach what your students need in that moment, that freedom, if we use it in a way that is strategic, can really allow kids to be successful.
Yes. So we should rejoice in that freedom. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because like it means nobody really knows and understands what we do. When I say nobody, I'm talking about other people in our school
Yeah.
don't fully appreciate what we do. That can be a problem, but mainly it's a joy.
I agree. I think that it's rough when you're a first year teacher trying to develop, 7 grades of curriculum, but when you're actually once you're able to get through that, it's being able to apply that is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There's lots more we could talk about with inclusion, but should we pop on to your nuggets of fabulous? You've already given us some really great hints and ways that we can start looking at our classroom. But would you like to give us some nuggets of fabulous? Could be anything, tips, tricks, ideas, repertoire that you'd like to share with everybody.
My biggest thing that really changed some of my classes, especially with students that were really struggling behavior wise and sensory wise. I've had quite a few autistic students in my lifetime, and being able to implement visual schedules not only helps these students, but I also serve a lot of English language learners in my school. So that also reinforces, the structure of the class and, what's going to be coming next. And it relieves that anxiety and it relieves that, the fear of, all right, well, what's coming next? Or I really want to use the drum. There's a drum in the middle of the floor. What do I need to do? Oh, it's not time for the drum yet. Visual schedules can be great. Social stories are amazing. Just being able to kind of essentially talk a student through a situation, especially when it comes to like showing expectations and things like that, can be a great way to show the expectation rather than just saying it. But the biggest, I guess, nugget of fabulous I want to leave is to encourage any teacher there that's listening to take that first step. I know that there's a lot that could go wrong and likely you'll make a mistake. But the reality is if we don't take that first step, we still have students that aren't able to access our curriculum. Yes, we're going to mess up along the way. I've implemented things in my classroom that I look back on and go, wow, that was completely misguided. That didn't help that student. Honestly, it probably comes from, it was just not helpful at all. But the reality is each of those steps took me closer to having a classroom where that student is able to access the curriculum. Taking that first step can be really hard, but it's so important because there are students that want to experience music. There are students that need to experience music in their lives. And we have the responsibility to help them unlock our curriculum and make sure that our curriculum isn't locked behind this barrier and make sure that they're really able to do what they need to do to be successful in our room.
I love that. They certainly are nuggets. Is it okay if I just show my ignorance a little? Anyone who knows me knows I'm happy. I love what you said about taking steps, and it's okay that they don't work because that's how we learn, and we are lifelong learners, that's for sure. Can I ask you about social stories?
Yes.
Can you clarify?
Social stories it's essentially a book. Think about when our young kids, we teach. My nephew is really into biting right now. So we have a book that's called Teeth Are Not for Biting. And it talks about when I am angry, I can chew on a toy. I can, this would be, it's just showing, all right, we don't want you to bite. Stop biting your friends. All right. So what can you do if you're angry? When I am angry, I can ask for a hug or things like that. Now, in what that's getting at in the story is, hey, stop biting your friends, do this instead. what that could look like in the classroom could be, for instance, when I taught a self-contained class of students with disabilities, they were younger and they were a little bit higher behaviors. So I used a social story at the beginning of every class to reinforce expectations. There were pictures of things. There were pictures of me, pictures of, like, it might say, in music class, we will not run. In music class, we will stay on our dot. So I took a picture and it showed the dot that they sit on. In music class, we'll listen to Mr. Tarbet. Just again, instead of saying these are the expectations and they're on the wall, it's really just kind of talking them through of what to expect, how they're supposed to interact in the classroom, and what things they might do. It's a really great way to show it visually and orally at the same time. Those can be super helpful and don't need to be anything fancy. Mine was literally just a piece of paper with some words and a picture glued to it. It was just, it doesn't need to be pretty.
No, it's a really good idea. I love that. You could also do it electronically, I guess, couldn't you? You could
For sure.
have a little library of them. Great. That's certainly a nugget. Your visual schedules, do you tend to have a similar sequence of types of activities, or do they vary greatly?
So when my lessons typically follow some sort of framework, usually it's like entrance songs, rhythmic something, book, melodic something, or flip-flopped. So like the way that I would do is I was just kind of show the major parts of my thing.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily, all right, first we're going to sing this song, then we're going to sing this song, but like, hey, we're going to do rhythm work. Then we're going to do our story. Then we're going to do melodic work or something like that. And I don't always use a visual schedule, but when I do, or when I have a student that I think would benefit from it, I definitely pull it out and implement it.
Yes, love it. They are great nuggets of fabulous. Now, not knowing your system over there, but we're finding here in Australia, definitely, we're having to work pretty hard to validate our position and to say, guys, do you know how important music is for our children? Like, nothing to do with protecting our jobs. This is for the children. So advocacy is a big thing here, and I'm working very hard in different little ways to promote the importance of music education. So do you have any advice to our listeners around advocacy, how we can convince those outside of our circle who know how important it is?
I think anytime you can show it rather than telling it, that is so much more impactful. I know here in the States, a lot of people that are parents' age now, when they went through school, their elementary music was one of two ways: kind of closer to what it is now, or more likely sitting, reading out of a textbook, singing out of a textbook. So people don't understand what goes on in our classroom sometimes. People don't understand how things are structured. They might walk by our class on the way to the cafeteria and they see a bunch of kindergartners jumping around like frogs, but they don't understand that we just went through this whole sequence of musical things and we just happened to be doing that by jumping around like frogs. So whenever I am able to show my administrators, show my colleagues, bring parents into the classroom, have my performances not be this big whole production with costumes and this and that, but really be like, hey, this is what happens every day in your classroom. This is how we use these different concepts. Let me show you how they can figure out what song I'm singing just by me showing you the hand signs. Like, isn't that cool? That's a really good skill. Really show them all the things that happen in our classroom, because it can be really easy for us as music educators to feel like everyone should know, but a lot of the time, the only interaction that people get with our classrooms are our performances. So when we're performing, putting on, the Wizard of Oz or this, that, which is, there's no problem with that. That's performative rather than education. Yes, so much education went into that happening, but how can we also show them the process rather than just the product?
Gold. I agree 100%. And I think it's up to all of us to work out how to do that best. I know in my situation, I've managed to COVID affected things as well, but we replaced, for want of a better word, a concert that was like with the lower school, the little kids. And now I started last year, and we're going to do it every year, and I love it. Each year level did something, did this little concert, and I called it, a celebration of learning, which is what our school does.
Love that.
They'll do a celebration of learning. So the year threes, for example, they did a song that we did in class, and I was able to give a little introduction, and we did Fuzzy Wuzzy, and we sang it in solfa, we sang it in letter names and showed it on the hand staff. And I said, and now we're going to perform it with an ostinato. What's an ostinato, kids? A repeated pattern. We'll play on this. So I actually turned it into, though we had practiced, we didn't give over 7 months to practice it, but we had a bit of a practice, so they knew what was expected because they were a bit excited to be on stage. But it was designed to be, here's a window into our music classroom. This is what we're learning. And
I think
so powerful.
there's nothing wrong with having a performative thing, but we need to be aware of what that says about what's going on in our classroom, or what people might assume that means. I love the way you do it. That's exactly what we do here, with my school as well. Each grade gets their own informant thing, and it's just,
Yes.
it's so much more meaningful, and it's so much easier and less stressful, and you don't have to start Christmas music or whatever in September. Like, you're able to just use what's going on in your classroom and just say,
Yes.
all right, we're going to just do that over there now. So
Yes.
many helpful for so many reasons.
So many reasons. I call it a window into the music classroom.
I love that. I might steal that phrase.
Oh, thank you. Like, have a look at what we're doing, because at the same time, so for us, this is like towards the end of the year, because our school year is January to December, and I'm trying to do assessment. I'm trying to finish off assessment and write report cards and finish off, I need to hear this and do that. I don't want to stop everything to do this, really. Look,
Exactly.
like you, I don't want to be against polished performances, but if someone asked me to do a musical, I'd go, oh, time for Debbie to retire. I ain't got time for that. So nothing wrong. Sorry, all those people out there listening, if you do musicals and you love them, I'm sorry. Great. You do that. That's wonderful. I just can't see how I could fit that in with everything else that I do.
And that also goes down to being awareness of yourself as a person.
Yes.
Like, I'm the same way. Like, would I love to do a musical at some point? Maybe, but like, maybe not 5 musicals every year. Like, I would, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yes. Because I think it's, showing what the kids do. So you're show it as often as possible, basically, is what you're saying. Actually, let's show
as often, and whoever will listen.
Whoever will listen. There are sometimes, I've actually got myself in trouble. Sometimes the kids will be doing something amazing. It just will work. Like, I'll try some harebrained idea and we're doing it and it's working really well. I will literally go to the phone and I'll ring the principal or the deputy and say, hey, what are you doing? Can you race down? You should see these grade 6s, quick. I think sometimes when they see the phone calls coming from Debbie's room, they go, oh no. But I think that says a lot too, doesn't it? That I'm so excited about what they're doing that I want to show the admin. But of course, the more they see what is actually happening in the room, the better. So I agree. Show everyone. And there are even times, I try not to do it too much because I do get labelled as the Fruit Loop, I know. But anyway, I can walk into the staff room and go, I'm so excited. Do you know that the grade 1s, I just did my favourite lesson. They now know their first rhythmic concepts and they're so excited. I know that makes me the Fruit Loop, but it also tells everybody that what I do is important and that their kids are learning in a different way in my room.
For sure.
Yeah. So we're going to finish. It's been great chatting. We must chat again, Bryson.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm always up to talk music ed.
Yes, I will.
Especially when it comes down to accessing the curriculum. That's one of my soapboxes I'll never get rid of.
Oh, I love it. And I will possibly see you at the summit, the next summit.
Yes, the Elementary Music Summit. We're super excited.
Yes. Oh, and I like to let you get on your soapbox, but, and it could just be me personally asking here, can you just quickly talk about your classroom? So you've got Bryson, who's the classroom music teacher, and you've got Bryson who helps other music educators through that music teacher in your podcast in the summit, and which is very similar to me with my in the classroom and doing crescendo. Tell me about those two things, actually fitting them in, how they work together, because I think they're really related. Like, I know for me, they're really related. What I do with crescendo helps my classroom practice tremendously. My classroom practice informs and helps my professional development practice. You know, they're obviously related, but I would just love to hear how you see those two things working in your life.
I echo a lot of what you said, where I feel like I learned so much about how sometimes being Bryson of that music teacher makes me analyze Bryson of, in my classroom and realize things that I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't thinking of things through a different lens. But, short answer, if long story short, that music teacher started by complete accident, and I just kind of kept doing it. And it became my self-care. I love doing this.
Yes.
We're like 5 years in at this point, so we're beyond saying it's just an ADHD fixation.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it might have started as that. But I mean, like, I'm here in my studio. I have, lights and a camera, and I'm able to connect with other music teachers from around the world. And I absolutely love it. It lights me up. I come home and I work on that music teacher because it really allows me to think of things in a different way, which lights me up as an educator of educators, but also it helps me in the classroom every single day.
You have just defined the way I think. Well, this is literally, I'm speaking to you. This is Sunday morning here in Australia, in Brisbane. It's your Saturday evening, I believe. This is literally my last day at the time of recording. This will come out a little bit later. The last day of a 2-week holiday. So it's our Easter break. Easter was in the middle. It's the last day of my holidays, and I will go back to school. And people say, how was your holiday? Did you go away? And someone will say, and I'll go, how was your holiday? What did you do? And I go, I had a great holiday. I've spent 2 weeks working on my podcasts and doing it.
Yeah, you're like,
I love it.
You're like, I recorded 9 podcast interviews. What? Yeah. I do that every time.
Exactly. And I go, oh, okay. But I've had a fabulous holiday. This is what I want to do. It's what lights me up. So, yeah, I feel a kindred spirit here, Bryson.
I agree.
All right, soapbox, time to finish. So if you can get on your soapbox, finish this interview, tell the world anything you wish to say. That's really important.
Oh, goodness. I'm a man of many soapboxes. But I guess if we had to boil it down to one, it's music teachers, specifically elementary music teachers, deserve high quality, content specific professional development. We deserve to be able to learn from other people that are doing the things that we're doing. We deserve to be treated as professionals by being given that PD in our content area rather than being told to go to you're going to learn, we have a new reading curriculum. Okay, why do I need to go to that? And that is one of those hills that I am willing to die on, is that music education and music educators deserve this content specific professional development that thankfully the internet is making so much more accessible, but we still have such a long way to go.
That is a fabulous place to finish this episode. Bryson, it's been a delight to speak to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
See ya.
As we know, laughter relieves stress. don't lose sight of the funny side of life. What's the difference between a hippo and a zippo? A hippo is really heavy and a zippo is a little lighter. Thank you so much for watching our Crescendo Music Education podcast. For more information about all things Crescendo, including membership and music education resources, visit us at crescendo.com.au. Don't forget to like and subscribe.